I'm a terrible mind reader. My sponsor has to remind me of that often because it's so easy in the midst of life, in the midst of recovery, in the midst of relationships to start telling myself different stories about what other people may be thinking. Uh, but that speculation, that guessing, that mind reading is never really helpful for my recovery. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to slip in to speculation.
Recovery can be hard, but it's worth it. There is hope knowing we can find healing one step at a time with Jesus and healthy community. Whether you're struggling with a hurt or a hang-up or a habit, you're not alone. During this podcast, we share real stories, practical tools, and powerful truths that inspire you to keep moving forward. No matter where you are on your journey, there's hope ahead. So stick with us as we walk this path together through Celebrate Recovery.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Hope in Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast where we talk life change stories and recovery conversations that help keep us moving down our road to recovery towards deeper healing and freedom in Jesus as we walk together towards Him. Super glad that you're here with us today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify. Thank you for being a part of this community, and we hope and pray that you're getting something out of this. Thank you to those that have been sending us messages and giving us ideas. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to hearing more from y'all. And so if you have any suggestions, ideas for us to talk through certain things on this podcast, drop us a line at cr@fellowshipnwa.org, cr@fellowshipnwa.org, and we would love to hear from you. And so thank you so much for reaching out. Let me introduce myself. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus. I struggle with anxiety and depression, sexual addiction, and grief. And my name is Andy, and I've got the great privilege of being able to be a part of the staff team for Celebrate Recovery here at Fellowship Bible Church. I get the privilege of being primarily down at Fellowship Fayetteville, our Celebrate Recovery there, but grateful for what God is doing all throughout Northwest Arkansas, not just at Fellowship, but at so many other churches that have Celebrate Recovery. And grateful for our conversation today. I was thinking a little bit about this actually today and a little bit earlier this week of about the danger of speculation in my recovery. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but maybe there's a rupture that has happened in a relationship. Maybe there's conflict that has happened with a friend, maybe a spouse, maybe a coworker, and maybe you find yourself in the aftermath of that. Maybe especially when things don't feel fully resolved, and you're starting to develop a narrative that you're telling yourself that, oh, they must think this, or, oh, because I said this, this is now going to happen. And, we develop these little stories to try and fill the gaps of conflict that happens. Something that happened actually pretty recently in my life is that, there was a day that, I was taking a day off, and my wife Julia was going into work, and she had asked me, "Hey, can you do the dishes while I'm at work? You're home. I know you've got a day off, but would you mind, making sure that you unload the dishwasher?" Which is a totally reasonable request and something that I feel like I am capable of doing. And there was something that popped up that day, and I got distracted, and I had to step into something, and I forgot to do the dishes. And about halfway through the day, I realized that I wasn't going to do that. And in my heart, I started going to this place of, man, Julia is going to be so disappointed in me, that she's going to be upset with me, that she's not going to understand the good reasons why I had to step away. And so I started having this ongoing kind of argument in my head. And it sounds so silly just to say that right now, but in the moment, it felt so necessary. That, oh man, this is what's going to happen. I need to prepare myself for this conversation. And, she's got every right to be upset. And then my shame started kicking in. And before I knew it, I was in this place where I felt like I was in trouble. I felt like I was no good. I felt like I was a terrible husband. I felt like Julia was super mad at me. And you know what? I hadn't even talked to Julia yet. And whenever she got home, I found myself kind of defensive and kind of, ready to step into this conversation. And as soon as I told her what was going on, she goes, Andy, that makes sense. Could you do the dishes before you go to bed tonight? And it was fine. But it's amazing how in that place of feeling kind of insecure, that speculation just ran roughshod over me. And I think it's something that can be really common in our recovery, where our shame kicks in, where we try to develop these narratives and stories about how we're convinced that things are going to go. But the reality is that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know the future. And I'm a really, really bad mind reader. Now, speculation, it creeps in really subtly. And I think a good way, even just to start off, what is a good way to maybe define speculation? Because there's a couple ways to define it. I think a couple ways could be this, that speculation is the story that we start to create when we don't have all of the facts. It's our attempt to kind of make sense of uncertainty. It often happens through the lens of our fears, of our wounds, and of our insecurities rather than the truth. And I think that's a key indicator there. That rather than the truth, the reality of the situation, we start to lean into our best guess of what we think is going on. Speculation, it's us filling in the blank. It's us allowing our fears, our insecurities, our anxieties to become the author of the story and actually start writing a story that maybe hasn't even been confirmed. And maybe I'm the only person in the world that has dealt with this in my recovery and in my life. And as I step into relationships and situations that have happened, but I don't think I am. And so I want to point out just a couple ways that, maybe indicators that maybe in a situation we might be slipping into maybe starting to make decisions or allowing ourselves to be driven by speculation rather than reality. I think one way is this. One indicator for me is that if I am starting to formulate arguments in my head, I don't know if you've ever done this where something happens and you're kind of rehearsing for what the confrontation is going to be. It's, he's going to say this and I'm going to say this to him. And then, I'll win the argument that way. I'm starting to develop these little arguments in my head and preparing myself for rebuttals. And I think inherently in that is this posture of defensiveness, this posture of I've got to carry the water for my own cause. And in that defensiveness, there's some fear. Maybe it's fear of rejection, fear of being found out, fear of being misunderstood. But then our fears and our anxieties, rather than being indicators of something going on in our heart that God's asking us to pay attention to, they start to slip into the driver's seat of our life, and we find ourselves reacting out of that. Maybe we go so far as I'm going to text this person and get ahead of this. Or I'm going to, here's another thing in there. I'm starting to assume poor motives for the person that maybe I've got an issue with or a potential issue with. I start creating issues and assuming that conflict is happening, maybe even when a conversation hasn't even happened yet. And I think one of the other indicators for me is that uh, my worry really starts to skyrocket. And I mentioned it before, but I think it bears repeating. I start telling stories to myself of what rejection is going to look like. And so my shame starts to come online. And, it's interesting. I think speculation primarily happens whenever there's relational conflict going on, whether it's with our spouse, coworkers, whatever it is, uh, relational conflict going on, or possible relational conflict that is happening. And I want to say, like, speculation makes sense. Our brain naturally wants to fill in the gaps, and sometimes our anxiety does that in there. And I want to say our anxiety is not a bad thing either. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Anxiety is a God-given emotion that's there to help us recognize and be alert towards real or perceived danger. And that's important to know that, because that anxiety, that fear and worry that kicks up, there's a lot of guessing and gap filling that's going on in that. And our anxiety was never meant to solve a problem or repair a relationship. Our anxiety is just there to alert us that there's something that may be going on. And then it's up to us to kind of examine what's going on. Is the smoke that I'm seeing because there's a fire in the kitchen? Or is it because I turned the toaster up to 10 and my toast is getting burnt? What's going on here? And so that fear, that anxiety, that worry, it kicks up, and our brain starts to fill in the gaps a little bit. And we find ourselves spun up. Maybe we're spun up in defensiveness and anger, or maybe we're getting spun up in our shame cycle. And maybe we find ourselves even starting to go down the trail of starting to act out. And our shame is confirming these beliefs that we already think about myself. I'm no good. I'm not worth it. And so I'm going to go and confirm things that tell me I'm no good and not worth it. And so I'm going to go to that bottle. I'm going to go to that website. I'm going to go to that place where I can risk my money, whatever it is that we run to. But here's the thing: speculation does not have to rule us. And so we're going to go to a quick break right now. But when we come back, I want to talk about a couple ways that have been helpful for me to kind of fight speculation in my life and in my recovery. We'll be right back.
Hey friends! A lot of people find the process of starting recovery scary because they aren't sure how to begin or what to expect. The easiest way to get started is simply to get started. Just take that next right step and go to a CR meeting. Every Friday night, we have our Celebrate Recovery meetings at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers. At 6 p.m., we have a great meal for connection with other recovery brothers and sisters. Then we meet for large group at 7 p.m., followed by open share groups at 8. Same schedule on both campuses, different teachers, different worship teams, but the same great experience. We'd love for you to join us this Friday night. It's never too late to start or start over again. For more information, go to fellowshipcr.org.
All right, we're back in this conversation about speculation in our recovery, why it's so damaging, but also how do we battle speculation in our recovery. And I want to talk about some tools that I've used in my recovery. Speculation, it drives us to this place to where we're trying to fill the gap and write our own stories in there. And rather than having all of the facts, we are assuming a lot of things. And so I remember back in the sanity lesson, we talk about these cycles of insanity that we get locked into in our recovery, where rather than making decisions based on truth, we're making decisions based on our own best understanding of the situation. And it reminds me of what it tells us in Proverbs chapter 3, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to the Lord. Lean not on your own understanding, and he will make your path straight. But that phrase in that verse, lean not on your own understanding, is a really key thing for me. And in fact, and it's written all through the Celebrate Recovery material, and I love this phrase, for most of us, our best understanding is what landed us in recovery in the first place. And so when there's something going on and I'm slipping into my best understanding, my best judgments, my best story that I'm crafting around this person and their motives and the things that's going on, chances are I'm slipping into speculation. And, one thing I forgot to mention earlier in there is that speculation really helps to drive and fuel resentments. And resentments can creep in without us even realizing it. And so we need to be careful with speculation, because we can start to tell, retell, and reinforce a story towards somebody and build resentment towards somebody that's not based on the full story. And so rather than living in kind of that insane cycle of trusting our own understanding, the definition of sanity that we're given in the sanity lesson in CR is wholeness of mind, making decisions based on truth. And so we need to address and seek to define reality in the situation. And 3 really helpful questions in there. The first one is, what do I know? What do I actually know beyond a shadow of a doubt? What are the facts of the situation? And that's why the daily inventory process of Celebrate Recovery is so helpful, because it helps us to kind of get our thoughts on paper so that they're not spinning around our head and we're not spinning more stories in there. What are the facts? Put them on paper. What do I know? And the second question is this: what am I assuming about the situation that I don't actually know? Even if I'm convinced that I know it, what do I not actually know? What am I assuming? Write those out. And it's important in this, don't shame yourself. There's some really good reasons why these things are coming to mind. But it's important to ask, hey, what are the things that I'm assuming? And then with that, what evidence do I actually have? So what do I know, or what do I think I know? Maybe a better way for that first question is, what is the story I'm telling myself here? What's the story I'm telling myself? What am I assuming in that story? And then what's the evidence that I actually have? Doing so, it helps us to actually address reality and live in the reality in front of us, rather than trying to write our own narrative. And in doing so, we can end up becoming victims of our own narrative there. So that's the first thing: address reality. What's the story that I'm telling myself? What are the things that I'm assuming in that story? And what's the evidence that I actually have in it? And with that, here's a really helpful phrase that I have that I heard from an author named John Eldridge that I think is really, really helpful. It's this. He says this: fight your battles once. When I'm slipping into speculation, one of the things that I start to do is I start to kind of do dress rehearsal for the battle I feel like I'm coming into. Because maybe there is a real relational rift that is happening. Maybe there's a major conflict that you need to step into. Maybe you're in a position of leadership and you've got to address something with somebody in your company or in your step study or whatever it is. And we can start to kind of hype ourselves up about it. But can we resolve to fight our battles once? I know for me, I expend so much emotional energy trying to battle and rebattle the different interactions that I have. Can we resolve to fight our battles once? And so what does that mean? It doesn't mean don't think about it. It doesn't mean don't, examine what's going on and what evidence do I have. But rather than trying to jump to conclusions. Maybe what we do instead is, rather than trying to answer all of the questions, maybe we just figure out what are the questions we need to ask. What are the questions I need to ask this other person? Rather than trying to answer them myself, can I resolve to fight this battle once? And these are the questions that I'm coming into that conversation. And I'll deal with it then. And in the meantime, can I trust that God is holding me right now? So, address reality, resolve to fight your battles once, then seek clarity. One of the things I have loved and been so appreciative about this recovery process is that it teaches us how to do relationships differently. Step 10, it tells us that we continue to take a daily inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Step 10 is about us keeping short accounts. And so sometimes there's things that pop up with other people, and we need to address it. And what's great is that conflict, I used to think conflict was this kind of dirty word, that it was this thing that needed to be avoided at all costs because it was scary and it would end up confirming all of the ways that I felt like I was already failing. But what if conflict is just God's invitation to deeper intimacy with that person? What if me addressing what happened with my wife or my spouse, or with my spouse, with my coworker, with my friend, with my my accountability partner, what if I leaned into that in a way that was different? And what if in leaning into that and risking that conversation, there was greater trust and a deeper friendship on the other side of it? Just kind of like in my in the example I shared with my wife, I did fall into some speculation in that. But when it came time to actually talk with Julia, I actually leaned into it. And she understood. It doesn't always happen whenever we step into conflict with people in our lives. But I was able to bring my heart to the table, and we were able to work it out. And it was deeper connection in it. And so we seek clarity. Another way to say that is we go and talk to the person that we're speculating with. Seek clarity. And here's a good way to maybe phrase that. Hey, when this happened, I felt this. What did you feel? What was going on for you? That's a great place to start. When this happened, I felt this. What do you think about that? Seek clarity. On the other side of risking clarity, there's the potential for a deeper relationship. And then ultimately undergirding all of this is this: root our trust in God. And that seems so churchy. It seems so kind of trite, but it's actually really profound. My worth, my hope, my joy, my identity is rooted in who God says that I am, not what I speculate others think of me. I have already been accepted in Christ. I don't have to be ruled by this fear of rejection that is spurring my speculation, these insecurities that I feel in myself. I am secure in Christ. Can I trust that? Can I take that in? A couple verses that kind of help me. Colossians 1:17. I love this. In talking about Jesus, Colossians 1:17 says, He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And what I love is that all things in that verse, we can actually write that verse out and substitute whatever it is that we're struggling with in that all things. Jesus, you are before this work conflict. And God, in you, this conflict, it's held together. It's not outside of your hands. You're in it. You're with it. The world's still going to be spinning on the other side of it. Jesus, you are before all things. And in you, holidays with my family is going to hold together. And I trust that it's not outside of your hands. And the world's going to be spinning whenever it's all said and done. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. And then this right here, one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture, Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 and 34, where it says this: seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will have enough trouble of its own. Those verses tell us what our job is in any situation. Above all, is to seek God. It's to seek his righteousness. And a way that we say it in recovery is that we seek to take the next right step. Take the next right step. God, you're going to do the rest. I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. I'm going to live one day at a time, one moment at a time. And I'm going to trust that you're in control, God. And if we can root ourselves in that as the foundation of it, it allows speculation to be much more easily battled. It's going to pop up. And for many of us, especially if we've had some really hard relationships in our life, if we've had hurt and wounds, which really is all of us, it makes sense that we're going to have that type of speculative reaction sometimes in conflict. Here's the other thing that's underneath it, and maybe this is something for another podcast, but lean into why that triggered you so much. Why did that conversation, why did me not getting the dishes done trigger me so much and spin me out so much? Maybe on the other side of that trigger, God is trying to alert you to a place of your heart that he wants to heal. And so don't shame the speculation. Don't be driven by the speculation. But in humility and in a healthy understanding of our own understanding, can we bring these things to God? Bring them to another person, our sponsor, accountability partner, phone a friend to help you make sense of what's going on, and then seek to take the next right step. Well, feel like there's a lot more that could be said in this conversation, and even as we're sitting here talking, I know there's some other things popping in my mind, but we're coming up on the end of our time together, and I just want to say this: thank you so much for being here and being a part of this conversation. And if you're in a place today where maybe there's some things that are spinning you out, maybe you're having a hard time trying to sift through what's facts, what is me trying to fill in the gap, and maybe in that place you're running to some coping behaviors that are just wreaking havoc in your life and you need some help, there is a place for you. Every single Friday night at 7 o'clock, at Fellowship Rogers and Fellowship Fayetteville, Celebrate Recovery meets, and we would love to see you there. There is a community, a forever family of fellow strugglers that understand, that have been there, and would love to walk alongside you. And so thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you sometime soon on a Friday night. God bless you.